Okay, today is the Communist Manifesto by Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels. Now, this is one of the scripted book review series in which I kind of go through my archives and find old blog posts or old papers I wrote in university. Fair warning, this is going to be kind of underwhelming. I don't have anything intelligent to say about this. I don't know, if I reread it now, maybe I would find something. But these kind of reflection papers I have from my college days, it's not terribly deep. In fact, these weren't even full reports. We just had to kind of write a few reflection papers on it. Interesting side note, though, this isn't in the papers, but kind of something I've picked up in the years since. It's called the Communist Manifesto by Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels, but I've read that. That's Karl Marx being generous with the co-author credit. Engels really didn't write any of the final draft. So really it's just kind of Karl Marx, but I guess because they published it under both of their names, officially it's by Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels. Okay, so this is the couple reflection papers on it. Communist Manifesto. So Karl Marx is a name everyone has heard of, but a few people have actually kind of read through his stuff. And that's the position I found myself in prior to this class, at which point the Communist Manifesto became assigned reading. I mean, I'd heard the name Karl Marx plenty of times, but I'd never actually sat down and worked my way through his writings. Actually, I don't say this explicitly in the paper, but kind of in the interest of full disclosure, I was very kind of sympathetic to socialism back in those times. In fact, I think I still am largely. Although, kind of when you're kind of 18, 19, and you're still kind of learning about these political ideologies, I would kind of flirt with different names and different labels, kind of not really being sure of what I believed. To a certain extent, that's even kind of true today. I mean, I can be overly emphasized by the last book I read and don't always have a stable set of beliefs. More true back then. So I was attracted by the image of socialism, certainly, but I didn't really know a lot about Karl Marx, and I had grown up in a conservative environment where I'd heard so many bad things about it, which made me kind of cautious about associating with associating my name with it too much. Associating my name with it. Now that makes it sound like my name is something I need to be careful of. I'm not famous. Taking on too much of the ideology. Yeah. Anyways, so I sat down and worked my way through Karl Marx's Manifesto. Actually, I was a little bit late for this among my group of friends because at my university, you either took History 101 or History 102. History 101 was kind of more ancient history up through the Middle Ages. History 102 was more modern history. I actually started off university more interested in the ancient stuff, the Romans and the Greeks, so I took 101. And then I changed my mind and decided I was more interested in modern stuff, so I switched focus there. Most of my friends just took 102 for their core history requirement, and they had to read the Communist Manifesto for that. Anyways, after reading the Communist Manifesto, I was surprised by a couple of things. To begin with, I thought that the Communist Manifesto, the work would focus on the morality of the situation, you know? Communism must come because this is the most moral way to live. So, you know, Karl Marx, I thought he was going to talk about how immoral it was for the capitalists to have so much wealth and all the people starving and all the, you know, the morality of capitalism. Like communism is we ought to have communism. Instead, to my surprise, he focuses on this very little. Instead, what he talks about in the Communist Manifesto is the inevitability of the workers' revolution. You know, you almost get the impression from reading this that he doesn't even have an opinion on whether it's a good thing or a bad thing. I mean, of course he does, but you almost wouldn't know that from reading this. He just simply talks about it like a historical inevitability. You know, this is coming, so get ready for it. Doesn't matter whether it's good or bad. Now, this wasn't the first time I had heard this. I think I had known since high school that Karl Marx and the early communists believed in the historical inevitability of communism. So I'd heard it before, but I had the impression that this was kind of like a side note. Like, communism is the moral way to live and it's the way people ought to live. And by the way, we also think it's inevitable. When you read the Communist Manifesto, you get the fact that it's so inevitable is like the number one point, which confused me. And by the way, if it's so inevitable, then why do the communists have to organize? You know, why were there kind of years of communists kind of getting put into jail and beaten by the police and all this kind of sacrifice, killed even in many cases, the martyrs? Why is everyone sacrificing if it's just inevitable that it'll bring it about? Although, the other side of the coin is seeing that if the inevitabilism is kind of the main thrust of things, makes maybe a little bit more sense why communist parties have so much power in communist states. I mean, if this is the historical progress, the inevitable progress of history, it's almost like, you know, like the old divine right thing of kings. I mean, the communists don't believe in the divine, but instead of God, you kind of take out God and you substitute in historical inevitability, and they're kind of ruling by right of historical inevitability. I don't know. Second reflection paper, also on the Communist Manifesto, is on the critique of the family. So this is one of the more interesting parts of the Communist Manifesto, is they talk about abolishing the family unit. Side note here, I've not seen this pop up much in kind of the biographies of Marx I read since. So I wonder a bit if this was just kind of like a youthful flourish that came up in 1848 and then they kind of dropped. I don't know. But this was part of the Communist Manifesto. And I said in this reflection paper, yeah, I find very much interesting in Karl Marx's critique of the family. I hadn't read any actual Marx prior to this. I just knew about him from secondary sources. So this was kind of new to me, his critique of the family. Now, actually, sorry, I should have mentioned this at the beginning. I went to a Christian college. It was, how to describe it? I guess there's I'm not going to describe it. I'm just going to say it's a Christian college, so we were kind of encouraged to write about stuff from a Christian perspective. So that explains kind of where I'm going to go on this next part. So I say there's much appealing about it. You know, at first, from a Christian perspective, it appears ridiculous. You know, Christianity is all about the family, right? But actually, if you look at the if you look at the New Testament, maybe not. You know, like the kind of family values thing actually isn't so strong in the New Testament. There's a lot of emphasis on the New Testament maybe about we're all brothers in Christ, but the family unit is not so important. And in that respect, maybe it resembles what Marx was saying in the Communist Manifesto. For example, Paul says that it's better not to get married. I used to kind of tease my friends with this in the dormitory and kind of argue that, you know, we shouldn't get married. Paul says it's better not to get married. And they tell me I'm taking it out of context. And maybe I was. I don't know. I'm not a biblical scholar. But then there's another interesting passage in the New Testament. And that's when the Sadducees approach Jesus. Now, this is one of those interesting things, I guess. The Sadducees did not believe in life after death. The Pharisees did. And even though the Pharisees appear to be the antagonists in the New Testament, you know, it's always talking about the awful Pharisees. The Pharisees were persecuting Jesus. Jesus' beliefs were actually a lot closer to the Pharisees than they were to the Sadducees. Jesus kind of almost was a Pharisee in kind of his metaphysical outlook. But the Sadducees did not believe in life after death. And this is, again, something that maybe gets forgotten, is I think this idea of an afterlife was kind of novel in certainly Jewish tradition at around the time of Jesus. This was something that people were having a hard time getting their heads around. So the Sadducees don't believe in life after death, and they think they're going to trick Jesus, and they come up and they say, okay, Jesus, there's this man, right? And he gets married, and his wife dies. So he gets remarried, and then his wife dies again. So he marries again, and his wife dies again. I think maybe he got married 7 times or something. And the Sadducee says, so, tell me this, Jesus, if there's a life after death, after this guy goes to heaven, who's he married to? You know, they thought they were going to trick him that way. And Jesus says, no, you got it all wrong. After, they thought that was showing how silly the resurrection was. And Jesus says, after they go up, all 7 of them will just be kind of living communally. Like there will be no kind of married people. Now, in fact, I didn't put it in this reflection paper here, but I think you could kind of even go further. There are more aspects in the New Testament where Jesus kind of talks about, you know, you must leave your family to follow me, or you must give up your family. I think there are more kind of instances as Jesus and Paul where it almost kind of seems anti-family. So this is really a fascinating concept that I don't think we analyze enough. I mean, if you take Jesus' words, that means in God's ideal society in heaven, if heaven is like the ideal way of living, then there's no such thing as marriage. And shouldn't we try and imitate heaven here on earth? At the very least, it does seem to take a lot of the sacredness out of marriage, because it makes it very obvious that this is not the way we're supposed to live eternally. This is just kind of a temporary way of living here on earth. Now, I speculate even more wildly here. I'd say perhaps marriage was just God's way of controlling society before the birth control pill was invented. I mean, after all, you think back to the 1st century, a woman who became pregnant and wasn't married and didn't have kind of financial security then was in big trouble. But now women can work in the workforce, and we have birth control, so maybe marriage is obsolete now. Maybe as Marx, who knows. And then I finish off the paper by saying, as Karl Marx noted, there is always a lot of emotion involved whenever an institution like marriage is questioned. So, these kind of rational arguments don't even matter. People are just kind of thinking about it emotionally. But it's an interesting question. Now, in my archives, I've got one more kind of reflection paper on Marx, and this is on Marx's legacy. It's less to do with the Communist Manifesto than just Marx's legacy, but I'll just kind of read it through anyways. A philosopher like Karl Marx certainly has a mixed legacy. Machiavelli has endured a reputation for being an unethical philosopher. I wrote this before I took a course on political philosophy, in which I studied Machiavelli a little bit more, and I think his reputation... Anyways, I'm probably unfairly characterizing him here, but moving on. However, even more people have died as a result of Karl Marx's philosophy than as a result of Machiavelli's philosophy. I wonder, you could make the case... I'm not sure I entirely agree with that now. I mean, certainly... lots of people have died under Marxism, but Machiavelli, I don't know. So anyways, between Stalin and Pol Pot and Mao, Marxism has killed more people than any other philosophy. And Stalin and Pol Pot and Mao are just like the big ones. It's not what, even without getting into the kind of all the other examples. Of course, it's ludicrous to blame this on Karl Marx. By the same logic, Jesus would be responsible for the Spanish Inquisition or the witch trials, or any of the other atrocities that committed in his name. And clearly, the official state communism under Stalin was very far from what Karl Marx actually intended. So, what went wrong? The question has been debated by philosophers and historians for a long time, and I will not try to tackle such a big question in such a small journal entry. Yeah, exactly. What was I thinking even bringing that up? I think I had like 100 words for these journal entries. Besides, even if I did try and get into this question, I'd simply be repeating what I read in other books or heard other people say. I think that's probably true even largely today. I don't think I have anything new and fresh to bring to the discussion. I guess my main comment is it's hard to dissociate Karl Marx from his legacy. It's really too bad, because when you read the Communist Manifesto, it does seem like he has genuine concern for the poor and genuine humanitarian concerns. And maybe these are going to be forever overshadowed by kind of all the evil done in his name. In a way, it is kind of ironic. Karl Marx mentioned at one point he believed ideas are not important, but the material reality is. Idealism is just a cover to disguise the material reality. This seems to have played out in his own ideas. Official communists, followers of Marx, claim to be following his ideas. However, many of them were actually just using the ideology as a way to better themselves materially. I think that's especially true kind of once it became the established state power. But that's kind of true of any established state power. State power tends to attract people who just want to improve themselves. Anyways, that's all I wrote here. I'm probably due for a reread of that at some point. I'm sure there's a lot more interesting things to say than I was able to get at here, but whatever.